Hello again, Amy here at School of Motion, and welcome to Lesson 2 of our Cell Animation in Photoshop series. Today we're covering one of the most important parts of animation, timing. We're going to discuss the difference between 1 and 2 frame exposures and how they affect the overall look and feel of your work. Then we'll get to the fun stuff and animate this infinite looping sprite that you see behind me. Don't forget to sign up for a free VIP membership so you can download all of the project files that I use in this lesson. Now let's get started.
Alright, so let's get started with our infinite loop sprite guy here. So what we want to do first is of course create our new document scene, and AnimDestin is automatically going to create a 1920 by 1080 canvas, and it's going to bring up our timeline frame rate for us. So we're going to select 24 frames per second, and we're going to save our work really quick. The first thing that we're going to do when we're creating an animation like this is we're actually going to plan out a guide for ourselves. So, you know, this guy's kind of traveling along this infinite looping path. That one's actually really bad. But we could spend, you know, all day trying to draw different variations of paths and getting this right. Or we can go in and create a more precise guide for ourselves using the vector tools here in Photoshop. And I've already done that for you guys, so if you're a VIP member, you will not only get all of my project files for this lesson, but you'll also get this guide pre-built to import. So if you're not a VIP member, you can just scroll to the bottom of the page and sign up. It's totally free, we promise, and you'll get all of that material. So if you already have that stuff downloaded, you can go up to File, and hit Place Embedded, and you're going to select this Infinite Loop Sprite Guide, and just hit Place, and then Enter to place it, and you are all set and ready to go on to the next part. Now, we're not quite completely ready to actually start animating this, so first we're actually going to create some spacing guides. So, if you remember back to the first lesson where I had that chart that was just all these different lines, well, we're going to be doing the same thing here. We're going to give ourselves some lines so that we can line up our spacing so that we know exactly where the ball needs to be, or our sprite in this case, where the sprite needs to be on each frame. So to do that, we're just going to come over here and we are going to select our line tool, and we are going to just kind of make this look like spokes on a wheel. So let's start with our vertical line and try and get it kind of centered. You're gonna hold Shift to constrain, and you just drag it down like that. And then across like this. Same thing, Shift to constrain. And then we're going to add 2 more lines to divide each of these in half. So we'll start somewhere kind of in the middle here, and this time, I'm not actually going to use Shift. I'm just going to kind of line it up with that center crosshair and let go, and then same thing from here to here. So I want to shoot for probably about where I was. Alright, and there you go. You have your wheel spokes. And I'm going to change this to like a dark blue color. That's just one of my preferences. You can make it whatever color you want. I just like it because it's a little bit easier for me to see and differentiate between like the actual spacing and the path. And then I'm just going to group these off, Control G. And now I have my spacing chart here. So I'm just going to go in and name the spacing. And then I'm actually going to duplicate this group because I'm going to need it on the other half here too. And we'll hit Control T to transform it over. And you can just hold Shift again to constrain. Kind of line it up in the middle. Hit Enter when you're done. And actually, I always overshoot this. I'll just nudge it back a little bit. Looks a little bit better. Alright, so now we have our spacing guides. Alright, so now we have all of this planned out, except we need 2 more lines in this midsection. Otherwise, when we start drawing, our little sprite guy is going to jump from this mark all the way up to here. And that's a little bit too far of a distance to cover. So we're going to draw in just a few more lines. And actually, this time I'm going to do it with the brush tool because I can just go really quickly with this. So I'm going to create a new layer. Now, if you notice, my time slider was all the way over towards this 5-second mark here. I need to bring this all the way back to the beginning because it's going to create my layers wherever this time slider is. So I need this to be all the way back here at the beginning now. And it did the same thing for my spacing layer. So I just need to drag that back. Cool, so now I can go in and just hit B for brush. And I'm going to go in and pick that blue color that I liked, and I'm just going to add those extra marks. So I initially thought that I was going to put my spacing here based off of an earlier test, but I actually feel like that's a little bit less correct this time. Each time you do one of these, they're going to be all a little bit unique. So this is the part where you're just going to have to use your best judgment as to where you want this portion of the frames to be. So you're going to kind of look at your spacing between here and here, and then give it kind of like a relative position between here. It's okay to stretch this one a bit more because he is kind of going to be like zooming up through this part. So let's say I think I'm going to put it in this middle part just because that feels a bit better. So this is where I'm going to have these frames from here, and it's going to come up to this position and then stretch over to this position. Same thing over here. So now let's name this guy actually while we're thinking about it, and we can throw this in the spacing group. And now that we have these charts drawn out and we kind of have a plan as to how our motion's going to be, we can get into the fun stuff with this and actually do some look development. So this is where frame by frame becomes really cool because you can do all kinds of stuff in Photoshop. And the brushes are probably the coolest feature of that because you can use all these brushes to create different textures and patterns and things to really give your sprite your own personality to it. So I did actually pick out a color palette for myself earlier. So this is the palette that I'm going to be using, but I'm actually going to show you guys the brushes here. So I'm going to set up a background layer, and I'm going to drop that below my guides, and I want my background to be purple, so I'm going to use Alt backspace, and that's going to fill in this entire layer with my background color. And now I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to call this Look Development. And now we can just kind of start playing with these different brushes. So we're going to select our brush tool, which is B, and we're going to open up this brush presets panel here. So over in this brush presets panel, you can see all these different like brush strokes that we have going on here. And this is just the default set that I have loaded up right now. So if we wanted to look at even more of the Photoshop brushes, because they're not all displayed here right away, you can actually add any of these assorted brushes, or I'm a fan of the dry media brushes. So I'm going to pick those ones, and I'm going to grab dry media brushes, and I don't want to just replace them, because if you hit OK right now, it's going to replace this entire list, and you'll lose all these default brushes too. I'm actually going to hit Append, and that's going to drop those dry media brushes into the bottom part of this long list of brushes. So I'm going to load in my dry media and my wet media brushes, but again, feel free to play with whichever ones you want. And now it's just a matter of, grabbing a color and just seeing what you like. Just draw a bunch of shapes, a bunch of squiggles. If you see a brush like this where it's kind of got these blunted ends, and you want it to have this tapered look, all you have to do is go into brush, and I'm seeing that tapered look because I am using Shape Dynamics, and I have a pressure sensitive tablet, which is the Cintiq in this case, but any type of Wacom tablet will work this way. So, like a Intuos or an Intuos Pro, and you're going to select pen pressure, and that's going to change this shape dynamic now, so that you can get those nice edges and different strokes based on the pressure sensitivity and how much you're pushing here. So you can do the same thing in all of these different tabs. You can just play around with these different options and see what each of them does. Now, because I have that initial shape that I like picked out, I'm actually turning my guide layers off to continue with developing this look for my little sprite. Okay, so because I kind of altered this brush and the way it's behaving a little bit, I'm going to make a new brush preset right now. So to do that, all you do is go up to New Brush Preset, and I'm going to rename this to, we'll just keep it Rough Dry Brush, and I'm going to call it 20 pixels and hit OK. So now at the bottom here I have this 20 pixel rough dry brush that I can reference very quickly when we come back and actually have to add these layers of color on at the end. And now I'm going to save that other brush that I was using to make the base of the sprite so that I can get to that really quickly. And then I'm going to go in and add sort of a darker reddish orange shadow to the bottom, and then give him a little bit of a white orange highlight. And this will help make him stand up off of the background a bit more and give him a little bit more of a 3D look. Okay, so I'm liking the way that looks now. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to clean up this look dev layer because I have all these paint splatters kind of on the side. I'm going to use my lasso tool, which is the L key, and then just hit delete, and that'll delete out everything else. Control D will deselect it. Now that we've done all that cool look development stuff, before we get into the heavy drawing, let's take a look at a quick tip that can help improve your drawing skills.
So if you don't draw a lot, you may have developed this bad habit of using too much of your wrist and your hand when you're trying to capture broad curved movements. And you get something that looks kind of like this when you're trying to use your hand a bit too much or your wrist area too much. What you really want to do is come in and lock your wrist up when you're trying to get a broad sweep like this, and you just guide it around using your whole arm and your whole shoulder. And that gives you a much better line, and it's just a lot easier to capture these curves in your drawings. And it does take a little bit of practice, but next time that you're drawing, definitely try to get in there and use more of your arm and not so much of your wrist and hand.
So let's get in there and start animating now. So what we want to do is we need our new video group, and that creates this. So our anim layer, and I'm going to call this my base, because we're not going to try and go crazy and do all of this stuff at once. We're just going to do this one layer at a time now. So we're going to start with just this orange base color here. So let's go in and we're going to grab that brush that we had before, make sure that we're on the right layer, hit B for brush, and we're going to start with whatever brush we decided for our base and our color, and we're just going to start drawing. Now if you notice, I extended this tail all the way back an extra space, and there's a reason for that. It's because we want to create an overlap as this goes around to keep it looking nice and smooth. Otherwise, our animation will start to look steppy. So let's go from one line here, midline, and then this back line is where you're going to want to hit your end of your tail. Now, as you're drawing this, notice I'm keeping this ball end where I drew that circle. I'm keeping that in the middle, and I'm trying to shoot for this midline using this guide as the middle of my shape, and that will help me keep consistent and on track as I'm drawing this. So once you have your first frame done, you're going to make a new one frame exposure, and we are going to turn our onion skins on. I recommend on dark backgrounds that you do change from a blend mode of multiply, which is the Photoshop default, to something like a normal, and then your max opacity to be around 10%, because otherwise you're not going to be able to see what you're drawing. So with a 10%, you can see that's nice and clear. Well, if I change that to, say, something like a 75%, notice how faded that is, and that's almost impossible to see. So we're going to stick with a 10%. Min opacity I have set to 50 because that works fine, and we're going to hit OK, and we're going to continue drawing. And remember, this tail needs to stretch all the way back to this line here. And we're just going to continue all the way around this entire loop now and just draw this base shape. So this is the part of the project where I recommend that you go and find a really good music playlist and just put that on in the background and relax while you are drawing all these frames, because from here out, all you're going to be doing is a whole lot of drawing.